I am Trinity Villanueva. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or ella. I am really excited to be one of the keynotes for this year's, I guess it's like the first one being done. So I'm really honored that I was asked. So thank you, Trina. I also am really excited because I'm a keynote along with one of my SAL classmates. So SAL being School for Art Leaders of the National Art Education Association. So a little bit about me, so you know who I am, at least a tiny bit. I am currently the Supervision and Administration Director-elect for the National Art Education Association Board of Directors. I am also the Public Art Reston Executive Director. I am also, there's a lot of alsos, the founder of the Arts Integration and Culture Department at the Carlos Osorio International Public Charter School in Washington, D.C. I am the co-founder of Mixed Collective. It's an affinity space for mixed identity individuals who are artists, and global majority. So those who are mixed race or transracial adoptees, or even maybe some third culture kids are in there, but mostly mixed race and transracial adoptees. So we are an affinity space for those who identify as artists. So if you're interested, I also am an administrator for the Anti-Racist Arts Educators Facebook group, and I work with the Institute of Anti-Racist Education, which is kind of located everywhere, but the CEO and founder is located on the lands of the Lenape in New Jersey. So I live and reside on the stolen lands of the Anacostions, but I'm currently in the lands of the Lenape as I give this keynote. So some other fun facts, just in case you feel like knowing, I'm a fire spinner. I'm an animal lover, sometimes, most days. I am a sneakerhead. I love milkshakes all the time. And I'm a diehard Philadelphia Eagles fan for those who like football. So American football, let me put that out there. All right, so really starting in, just jumping right in, because I want to be conscious of your time. And I also want to make sure that because this is all online, pause me if you need to take a bio break. Or if I'm talking too much and it's just too much, or you just want to kind of go back and reflect. And I will allow you spaces to do that within this. I tried to set it up that way. I am a true educator at heart. So let's talk equitable arts, inclusion, and belonging with intentionality. Objectives for today. One, have a basic understanding of the title. It's a mouthful, so we want to kind of dig into that. Two, know that this is a mindset. It is not a checklist. So if you think that you were going to come here, sorry if my computer keeps beeping. If you think that, you were going to come here and I was just going to give you a bunch of resources and then you can check, 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 check. That's not how this one will work. And so that's why I'm saying, like, I need some time for you to have some moments of reflection. And hopefully you have a pen or a writing utensil of some sort, or you're taking notes digitally, but have that handy during this time. And you can always refer back to it and see how much you grew. And then the third one is to start redefining what your classroom activities or your curriculum, for those of you who might not be in the classroom all the time, I understand that, what that means. So I'm going to go over them again. Have a basic understanding of the title, know that this is a mindset and not a checklist, and start redefining what your classroom activities or curriculum means. Okay, so let's jump in. Seems easy, right? Well, if this is something that you're still pretty new to, and by something meaning talking about equity or diversity, inclusion, race, anything of that nature, that means you may have had the privilege of not having to think about these things every day of your life, and maybe not even teaching it. A lot of folks I've talked to over the last year or so, a lot of this has not really happened until the death of George Floyd. Um, in the communities that and the circles that I'm a part of, we've been talking about this for years. So it really just depends on where you're coming from, right? And where you're coming from, I mean a lot of things. There's a lot of intersections there, but I am a strong believer in building bridges and not dividing communities. So I really want to approach this talk today of what you want to get out of it, right? And I'm not there with you and we're not in person together, maybe one day, but for now, take out of this what you want. Take your driftwood at the end of this time with me. So, yes, if you have had the privilege of not having to talk about these things your entire life, then this might not be so simple. And it might seem simple, right? But it's definitely easier said than done. Also, if you are a person of the global majority, if you're a person of color, if you come from a marginalized group, you might think that, oh, I got this, I know this, I've been talking about this, but we always have room to grow. We always have room to learn. And I myself will tell you that I'm still learning all the time. So just because I'm giving this session does not mean that I have all the answers either. And it doesn't mean that we need to agree on everything as well. So, and that's also, right, the beauty of art. So I'm going to repeat myself a lot. I do this because sometimes maybe it's the first time you'll get it. Maybe it's the 22nd, maybe never. I don't know. So again, this is all mindset. And I will continue to say that throughout. And it's not something that you can just check off. And when I say that, I am referring to like, okay, I'm going to listen to Trinity talk. And then now I listen to it. So I'm good to go. Like this isn't how that works. You can't just add it to the toolbox and just start using. Yes, you can do that, but you can't think that, oh, I just heard all this information, I've absorbed it, and now I'm an expert. I guess that's just what I'm trying to say. It doesn't work that way. And I feel like I have to say this a lot because that tends to be something ingrained in our culture of that you just take. And then now you've racked up all these certifications or you've racked up all of these, classes under your belt, and now you're an expert. And that's a lot of how our system works and how it's designed to work. But with something like equity in the arts, it doesn't work that way. What are some words that people in the arts classrooms or arts administrators or just people here in the United States tend to back away from, shying away from? And depending on the communities that you're part of, also a lot of this has become politicized. And I don't want to do that, right? I want it to be, this is something that everyone should be able to talk about. So here are some words. I think I have 6 words or phrases that I collected that I just wanted to say. Anti-racist, white privilege, performative allyship, colonization or colonialism, cultural competence, white supremacy. Let's take a pause. Let's take a deep breath. Now let's reflect in that. How did me saying those things make you feel? And if you need to like rewind and play again, please feel free to do that. But I want you to sit in this right now. And while I talk, I want you to think about it, marinate in it. Were any of those words triggering? Did it make you feel uneasy? Do you sort of like want to stop listening? You're like, oh, I'm so not here for this, like white supremacy. I'm not racist. Did it make you feel uncomfortable? Or maybe you were like, yeah, Trinity, this is going to be great. And that's what I'm talking about. Ooh. Or maybe you didn't know what some of those words meant. So that's okay. Any of those things, honestly, it's okay. And it's probably great that you're online because you can stop me and you don't have to listen to the rest. Or maybe you want to listen. Maybe you want to learn a little bit more where I'm coming from. So let's be honest. Depending on where you're located, what you have read, where you've been educated, who your parents are, what your educational background is or isn't, what your socioeconomic status is. Maybe you've grown in that, maybe you haven't, um, or maybe you've gone backwards. I don't know. Who you're surrounding yourself by on a daily basis. Some of these words might feel overwhelming. And I want to say that as myself, and I'm always going to come from my perspective. Let me always be clear about that. Like I said, I don't have all the answers, but this is just my perspective. As a woman of the global majority, as a woman of color, I did not always have the vocabulary to express how I felt, what my uncomfortable feelings were like growing up in a very, very distinctly white town in the suburbs of New Jersey in middle school and high school. Um, and I had these feelings for a lot of my life. And now I'm in a position where I'm really excited because I feel as though we as a society are now collectively co-developing this language together. And that is really important to me. I want to share this quote. I share it a lot, but as an arts administrator, as an arts executive, as an arts leader, as an arts educator, I love this quote. Comfort the disturbed, and disturb the comfortable. So we're naturally artists by nature. And this is one perspective. This is what arts can be. And to me, this is what arts is for me. It has always been a place where I have been able to find myself. It's a place, it's a safer place, it's a brave space where I am able to have more difficult conversations surrounding something, putting a piece of art there to have a discussion. It becomes a really wonderful environment for people to be able to talk about something that maybe they're not always comfortable to do. Start by breaking down the title of this session. Um, this is one of those sessions where it matches what we're discussing. Sometimes I will click on something and or attend something and I loved the title. I was like, yeah, this is great. And then I go and I'm like, this was nothing like what I thought it was going to be. So when I was speaking with Trina, when she asked me if I was interested in having this space, I I told her, and told myself that it was really important what title I had. Let's talk equitable arts. Say that 5 times fast. So what does that mean? What do you think it means? So take a minute and type it, write it, draw it, um, however your brain works. Don't make a poem. I don't know. So take a minute and write that down or package that somehow. Press pause, pause me, write down what you believe your definition is of what does equitable arts mean to you. And I'll give you a second. Okay, great. So either you unpause me or I don't know, you didn't do the activity. Nobody's watching. It's fine. So now that you have defined it somehow, some way, shape, or form, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a personal story that happened to me in July of 2019 while I visited a museum in the city where I live. I'm not going to disclose which museum it is. But if you're watching this and you happen to be there with me, well, then you would know. So I walked into a museum that I had been to many, many times. I went to a different side of the museum, a different wing than I had normally gone to. And when I got in there, the security guards were mostly African American or Black American. I maybe a Caribbean. And you know, I I remember feeling like I was being followed around. Um, I thought to myself, like, what is going on? Like, what is up? And, as I walked around, there was this feeling like I didn't belong, right? And it's not like I haven't visited museums my entire life, but I think now with being more aware of what has been happening in my life and my personal experiences and having words for it, like I mentioned before, I felt like, I was sort of being profiled. And I was with my other colleague who is also, he's a middle school math teacher, and he's super super awesome. We were both fellows in a program and we were walking around, but we happened to just be the two of us. I had gotten stopped by three different security guards, um, asking me to move around my backpack that I was carrying. And so many times in the museums, I've been able to carry my backpack in the front because I know we don't want to touch the artwork, right? We don't want to get too close. We don't want to bump into anything, right? Typical etiquette. And in the museums. And I remember thinking, like, I had seen so many other people walking around and with their backpacks, they weren't saying anything, just to me and to my friend. And as we continued within the museum, I started realizing this museum is different to me now. I don't know why. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I didn't have that sense of belonging. Later on, when we convened with the rest of the fellows, we were asked specifically to talk about our day at the museums. And I broke down and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I couldn't contain it. And it felt great to release. I called them happy releases, even though there's lots of tears. But I broke down and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I didn't feel the sense of belonging because there was nobody who looked like me. And by that, I mean, I'm walking around and I'm looking at the art. No one looked like me. Um, the artists themselves, their names weren't like mine, Villanueva. Um, and the majority of the people visiting the museum also didn't look like me. And even so far as to thinking that even ourselves, people of color, are so fossilized in the thinking and indoctrinated into thinking brown or black might not be the best. I was even profiled by people of color that I was doing something wrong. And as an arts educator and as a person who absolutely loves the arts, that got to me. And I shared this and I shared it in a group of mostly white women. And there was one other person of color in that room where I shared. I think there was just one. There was one or two. And I remember specifically, it was an African American young educator. He was early in his 20s, early on, really early on in his career. And he started crying with me too. And he said, you have explained and expressed exactly how I've been feeling my whole life so well. He's like, it's just, he felt it. And we held each other in that space. And so did our other co-conspirators, if you want to call them, all of the other educators and fellows in that room. And I remember feeling like something's got to change, something's got to give. And maybe this is part of my journey, right? So after telling this personal story, how did it make you feel? Think about that. What are your takeaways? And reflect in that. So I want to open it up to you. Have you had an experience that was similar? Especially if maybe you're a person of color, a person who might be marginalized in some capacity. And by that, giving examples, maybe you identify as trans or non binary or a person with a disability, so on. How does that land? Maybe you thought to yourself, wow, I've never really thought of that before. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle. I mean, when we think equitable arts, I think a lot of checklist mentalities where most people are. Um, any any type of person when I say that. a lot of people tend to want to check off the box for a lot of things. It's really ingrained, like I stated before, into our colonized culture, which I'm a part of, right? I'm no different than you, which is this idea of getting things done, right? We wake up, we go through the motions, we get things done, we check things off our list. I do that. I am a Virgo and I love lists. Okay. I love lists very much so. Keeps me on point. But we don't always stop and think about what the impact is, right? And so that museum that I visited, for example, one of the most well-known museums in the world, in this globe, but it's been part of a culture and it's been okay for a really long time. And thinking of how that lands, how this affects the psyche, how it affects the mental health, the after effects later on in life or throughout life. And of course, to one's sense of belonging. Because ultimately, that is what we're aiming for, is to equitable arts is to really, include so that with intention, we will get there, so that people at the end of the day, so our learners, our scholars will feel that sense of belonging in their life and it will permeate throughout. So maybe you have students in your classroom who are students of color, or they're students of the global majority, or they're trans students, or they are, students with some sort of disability, invisible or visible. And maybe they're part of that minority in the class. Maybe they're the only one. Maybe there's only 40%. I don't know. You know your class. I don't. But you have to become intentional of how you include them into the classroom or in the arts, because this is the key in making it more equitable. So now, I'm sure you're thinking, like most educators do, okay, great. Tell me how. How do I do that? And I have to stop you again. if you went that way, if you didn't, applause. And if you did, it's okay, because we're learning, right? We're growing and learning together. So that's not how this mindset thing works. It's not about having, okay, for example, Latinx Heritage Month or Hispanic Heritage Month, however people celebrate it in your classrooms, in your school. How many Hispanic or how many Latinx artists can I get? I need a list. I see this all the time on Facebook. I'm, there. It's September, it's October, so I need a list. Who are your favorites? I'm gathering some intel. I want some insight, and I need a list, and I want to do this with the class. No, I see this all the time, and guess what? I used to do the same thing. I used to compartmentalize instead of thinking about other things like, why can't you teach about Latinx artists throughout the entire year? Why not? What if the majority of your student population reflects that? That's what they need to see, right? You don't want them to be like how I felt at that museum. Oh my goodness, nobody looks like me. So this isn't for me, because that's not true. At the end of the day, it is for every single person, regardless of who you are, regardless of your genetic makeup, regardless of the things you are capable of doing, regardless of how much money your family makes. It is for everybody. That is the greatest part about arts. It already is the most democratic of all. It is the most accessible of all the subjects, because you can do it with anything, right? So what you can ask yourself is kind of what I was saying. Who are my students? Who and what is missing from my curriculum? And how can I fill in those gaps? Where can I start to implement and integrate cultural differences and variety within my class projects? And so ask yourself, if you're always pulling from the same websites, if you're always pulling, from the same resources or even from the same circles, expand on your search. If you're really heavily oriented in a certain type of medium or a style, Maybe because you have to, maybe because that's what the tests do. That's a whole other conversation. Maybe you're an AP art teacher, like, but you need to see where you can be more flexible in certain areas and where in there can you change that. So those are some questions you can start with. You can also ask these questions. Well, how do your students learn? How do they learn best? Are they English language learners, or is English their native language? Am I making things accessible for them? Are the materials accessible for them? How are they learning, especially during this virtual time? Do they have quiet spaces? Do they have a backyard? Do they, like, there's so many questions. And I'm sure if you are the great educator as you are, you have asked these questions, but you got to ask them all the time, every time you're planning something. And once you start doing that, it just becomes second nature. Even who needs more help? So I don't have perfect answers for you, right? That's not the point of this. But what I can say is if you're not asking those questions all of the time, in every process, in every single project, then that's not equity. But I'm going to try and get through this. So if you need to go, if you need to pause, if you need a bio break, you can do that. Okay, and we're back. Here's a photo of the differences between equity and equal. And I know a lot of people have seen the tree one. I'm going to show you a different one. Now take a second and pause and look at this photo. It's exactly what I'm talking about. And this is how you need to shift and frame your thinking. So another personal little story. The first time I saw the movie Moana, let me share this. My ethnic makeup, I'm American. That's my nationality. I was born and raised in the US. My mother is from Puerto Rico, duh. And my father is Native Hawaiian, Kanaka Maoli, and Filipino. And so I'm all over the map. I did my DNA recently, and I'm literally all over the map. It's amazing, incredible. The ingredients that create me, right? And we all have those. So the first time I saw Moana, and I'm very in touch with my Polynesian culture, I was crying at the opening credits. Like the music starts, and I'm like crying. And I went with my son, and at the time, I think he was like 4 or 5. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm in my 30s. And this is the first time that I'm seeing a Disney princess who has my features. She's tan like me. She's brown like me. She's got the shape of my legs. Oh my goodness. I was teased for my legs growing up. They were doing, the taulunga, the Samoan taulunga. She was doing a little bit of, Tahitian moves. She was doing a little bit of hula. Like, it was amazing. Anyway, I was completely touched. I could see myself. It resonated with me, my culture. And people kept saying, oh my God, I saw that movie and I thought of you, Trinity. And she's so beautiful. And that culture is amazing. So what's worse is a few years later, I was talking to a next door neighbor, and she said to me, my daughters watch what you do outside and you're always like dancing and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm a hula dancer. And she said, they love watching you dance. I was like, okay, yeah, here's my dog. Virtual. So I asked if they had ever seen Moana, and I'm sure, if they have, they will understand that Polynesian dance is a huge part of our culture. Her response was pretty simple, but it kind of cut through me. And she said, oh, no, they haven't seen that. They like Disney princesses. And I said, Moana is a Disney princess. And she said, no, I mean like the actual princesses. It made me pause because I realized that Just because Moana wasn't a typical European princess with a tiara on her head, because she was a princess and she was a chief in her community, right? Which is a part of Polynesian culture. Just because she didn't have a tiara on her head, she wasn't a princess because she wasn't white. And I share this again because it's those types of fossilized beliefs that we all have. We all have them. I even have them. Like what someone looks like or what someone is, or what a true artist is, the Picassos and the Van Goghs, and, same with music and Bach and Mozart and Beethoven. And those are the greats. Why? Why is it only Eurocentric? Why is it so white? Why is it so? We have amazing, amazing cultures from all over the world. And that should be reflected in how we educate our art students, because we're not just trying to teach them how to take a test. Art is to teach them how to think, right? And it's about the process. It's the process. I'm not going to get into cultural appropriation today because we don't have enough time, nor do I think that is appropriate to talk about right now. But that is something that, if you don't know too much about it, it should be something that you start to learn more about. So look around your classroom each semester, each year, each quarter, each week. Ask yourself how your students can co-create along with each other, right? How can your students collectively create art that is equitable and accessible for everyone? Accessible is another really important keyword. Learn about engage, right? Engage in each of your learners' cultures as much as you can. And when I say culture, that can mean anybody, right? A lot of times when I say learn about your cultures of your students, people assume I'm just talking about brown and black, and I'm not, right? Anyone. And I also don't want to be exclusive when I say brown and black either, which is why I say global majority. Because sometimes that doesn't always encompass Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islander, mixed race, identity, all of those things. Sometimes you can do simple activities, right? What's the story behind your name? First name. Last names can also be triggering. But always, like, I know a lot of times the mindset too, people I hear all the time, you can't say anything these days. You can't do anything. Everybody gets offended. And you know what? There's a part of me that's like, I know, I so see you. And there's a part of me that almost agrees with that, because, I'm an older millennial, or a cusper Gen X millennial, and then my son is a Gen Z, or whatever the newest generation is, because he's 11. And I'm like, everything bothers everybody. But that shouldn't be impeding upon how you diversify the resources and the influences and the artists that you introduce to your students and yourself, right? Because we have to teach ourselves first before we're teaching others, or the conversations that you have. So see where the gaps in your learners, see where their gaps are, and use art to fill in those gaps. Now, I say all of these things too, because what may have worked for many years may not now. What may have worked last week may not next week or next year. And definitely what may have worked prior to the pandemic may not post-pandemic, right? And when I say the things like everybody gets offended, when people say that, right? People will say, everybody's offended all the time. It's a shift, and there are growing pains. And there are moments when I get annoyed with the shift, because I'm like, oh my goodness, I could say things like this before and I can't anymore. But that means that we're growing. We're growing as a society. I said it in the beginning. We're co-developing and constructing new language together. It's when I was growing up, people called me Spanish. They're like, oh, you're Spanish. And I was like, well, technically, I'm Puerto Rican, Hawaiian, Filipino, whatever. I'm American. Oh, but yeah, you speak Spanish. I didn't call people who spoke English, like it was just, it's an ignorant statement, right? And by ignorant, just meaning like not really knowing what you're saying and how that impacts. Then as I got a little bit older, then people would call me Mexican. And I'm like, I'm not Mexican, right? And then after that, then people would start saying Hispanic. And now it was Latina. And now it's like Latinx. And now people are like, that X is not good for Latinos who speak Spanish. So it's Latine. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't even know how I identify because it's constantly changing. So I just want to let you know that if you feel overwhelmed, it's okay. And if you feel like you don't always have the best words, just try. But writing it off and saying, I don't want to do this, or I'm not down with that, or that's not what my belief system is, also means that you're completely negating how somebody feels, how someone identifies, and completely negating the fact that we need to grow as a society. Because, we used to say a lot of terrible words before, and now we don't. And so we need to move forward as a society and continually, as educators, understand that that's for the betterment of who we all are. So now with a little bit of inclusion and belonging with intentionality. I talked about it a little bit. I apologize if you can hear my family in the background, but I guess they just can't keep it down. So let's pause and think about a time that you felt included and how that made you feel. So now, inclusion and belonging with intentionality. Let's pause and think about a time that you felt included and how that made you feel. Did you feel like you belonged? Think about a time that you felt excluded. And did you feel like you didn't belong? So I want you to pause, reflect, absorb, saturate in it, or marinate in it. Yeah, there's the word. Marinate in it, and go back to your writing utensil or your sketch pad or your digital, I don't know, you're typing. Maybe you're walking. I don't know. Maybe you're in the tub. Who knows? But think about it. Pause me and think about this. And we're back. So, to expand upon why I say with intentionality, going back to everything we have covered in this short amount of time, it has to be with intention. I wanted you to reflect in the time that you felt included versus the time that you felt excluded, because this is how your students could feel, right? Everybody has their own healing processes. There's so much intersections, and people will say like we're like onions. There's so many layers. So there's so many layers. And when you are educating your students or your teachers or creating curriculum, everything needs to have intention. Not just because it's something interesting, not just because now people are talking about this, not just because this is like a cool hot topic and it's just a phase, it's a fad and it'll just blow up. Not just because, other people are doing it. So it's like the Jones effect and you have to do what everybody else is doing. And not just because it worked before, right? So you have to make intentional, purposeful decisions for your classroom and the art that you use and that you showcase. And you want to teach and you want to guide with this purpose. So there should be reasons behind everything as much as possible. Clearly, there's something just for fun, but if that's your intention, if that's your purpose, cool. And each artist that you explore has an intention behind it. I understand, really do, really understand that there are a lot of priorities. A lot of times I heard from a lot of the teachers that I would supervise or teachers that I worked with, there's so many things that we have to do. I don't have time for this. I can't add anything else. Like now I have to think about equity. It's like, no, no, no. It's not the checklist, right? It's the way you integrate it. It's the way that you come from that lens. It's how you have to train your brain to start thinking. And it's just that it's a new way to think. It's a mindset. It's a way that you approach. Um, and you're not always going to feel 1000% comfortable. I could say 100% too. I like the 1,000 though. And you're not always going to feel super comfortable. And that's okay. It takes time. You have to start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. I've been uncomfortable a lot in my life. And so it might be easier for someone like me. Let's be fair. It might be easier because I haven't had the privilege of not thinking about these things. I've always had to think about them because it always affected me. So I understand that it takes time. I understand that it takes practice. I understand that, sometimes you need to have an accountability partner. Maybe that might work for you. And you definitely need to have flexibility. So, to revisit our objectives, 1, have a basic understanding of the title. 2, know that this is a mindset and not a checklist. 3, start redefining what your classroom activities and curriculum means. So I really hope that you were able to cross those off. That was a checklist. But cross those off and start reframing. And if you already are in this journey and part of this journey, and this is something that you do and you're proud of, there are always ways that we can improve, right? There are also always ways that you, as a teacher in your community, can help others and help elevate them and help them to understand a little bit more of the framework of how this works. Because there's there's like the social justice, there's the multicultural, there's the CRT, the culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive education. Then there's like the anti-racist. Oh my goodness, there's like so much. There really is. There's a lot. So I don't want you to be so overwhelmed when you leave this today. I want you to feel like I can do this because you can, right? You totally can. It's just switching that mindset, and starting to think maybe a little bit differently of how you approach things before. So here are some of the resources I know of that you can pull from. And these are pretty general. If you can do a deep dive search of things that might be particularly better for your group of students, learners, scholars, then you should by all means take that and run with it. But there are a couple of people that I know that are tried and true. So Miss Paula Lees is a friend of mine, and she runs the Anti-Racist Art Teachers website. It's a great place to go for resources. Just kind of like browse, right? She has lesson plans. She has different modules. She has amazingly, she and maybe a couple others, I don't know, but they have really gathered a ton of artists of all different ethnicities, areas of the world, and categorize them in a way that makes sense. It's a little intuitive, very intuitive on the website. So you could totally check out her website, and I'm going to put it right there. You can also visit, and I'm actually starting to work myself on putting some things on their website because I'm doing some things for them, some residencies. But the Institute of Anti-Racist Education is not particularly for art, but if you were confused about some of these words that I talked about today, go there and check them out. My girl Ashley is the CEO and founder of that. They're amazing. So I think that's worth something for you to browse. There's also so many people, so many people on Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, who just put things. So I'm wondering if maybe OATK12 can do some sort of resources. There's also a lot of resources on the Facebook group that I'm help manage as well, the Anti-Racist Art Educators group, but there's also the Anti-Racist Art Teachers group, and then the Anti-Racist something curriculum. I mean, there's so many things. Like literally take advantage of your resources. It's no better time than 2021 to start getting on social media just for professional stuff, because personally, I don't like Facebook, but I go on Facebook just to check out resources sometimes, and I just pull and I grab, and then I like, research and I run with it, right? And that's kind of how that works. Um, NAEA, if you're a member, they're doing a lot of great work with equity, diversity, and inclusion. They call it EDNI. So if you are an NAEA member or through your state association, I know that there are a lot of free resources that you can rack up on. And I know that they are also, so this is not just like a thing that I'm talking about right now, like, oh, by the way, you should do this. It's also happening nationally. And so I, I being on the board of directors now, I am privy to understanding a little bit better of what the goals and the missions and the objectives are for NAEA. So I do know that it is shifting. It is going into this direction. So hop on board. Also, School Arts Magazine, Nancy, she puts together a fabulous magazine which has a lot of great resources, and you can expand your palette. Like that pun. And you can dig into some of the stories there, some of the activities there. I believe that my cellmate, Jane, she also has been in there, writing up some things. So, and if you have things that you want to be published because you know that they're tried and true and it's great, lesson plans, or I don't know, different things, you should reach out to School Arts Magazine as well. There are other ways that you can do this too, right? You can start a book club at your school. You can start reading books that are really intense sometimes, but they're great for starting that journey, right? Maybe you're not a bookworm, so don't do that, but maybe you are and you have time to do that. Every week, try to learn about an artist, a new artist that interests you, an artist that you would have never thought, um, or maybe dig up another artist that you thought you knew a lot about, but you're starting to learn a little bit more about them. I always think that it's great to do this, because it keeps us on our toes, and then we're able to expand upon what we're offering our scholars in the classrooms. If you are able to have more resources at hand and more knowledge on that. Ask your students to bring new artists to the classroom that interests them, right? So, and expand on what that means, because visual arts can mean so many things. So many. We don't talk too much sometimes about how it goes into other disciplines, right? So if maybe there are students in the class who love theater. So maybe they need to be looking at people who were like scenery designers or people who are costume designers. Maybe they love film, and so there's just so many things that you can do with art that doesn't need to be the typical painter, sculptor, textile. I don't know. Like, it doesn't have to be always that. It can expand, and you can expand that definition too, as well. So always ask yourself these questions. Who are my students? How can my learners also lead within the classroom? How can I connect with community-led organizations, county organizations, government organizations, to give students another way to lead and connect to the arts? So I say this with expanding upon just the classroom, libraries, museums, historic trusts, historic homes, gardens, homeless shelters. The sky is the limit, right? And now with all of this virtual learning, maybe you can do calls, on Skype or Zoom with other artists from across, the world and across states or across whatever counties, and bring them in and have them talk to students about their process and things that excite them. And maybe your students vote on it. I mean, there are so many cool ways that you can make arts more equitable for your learners every single day. And it doesn't need to cost more money. It just needs to have a shift a shift, not extra work, but a shift in how you think and how you approach. And I hope some of this landed. It's a lot of information. What I would expect is that it's driftwood. And what is your piece of driftwood that you're walking away with from this session today? And it's unfortunate that I'm not able to meet all of you in person, but if something really landed well with you, I would love to hear back. If something really annoyed you, like, and you were just like, I did not like this at all, you can also reach out to me. Like, I have no problems with having really cool conversations that can kind of get us um, to align in a way for overall the betterment of our arts education that we are giving our scholars each and every week. So either way, you can reach out to me in two different ways. I have Instagram, and so it's right here. That's my Instagram account. Or you can email me, and this is my NAEA email that I check probably about once or twice a week. So feel free to reach out to me either way. And I'm really, really grateful to online art teachers, K-12, and also especially to, we're serving on a board together, Trina Harlow. It's been really great. Thanks so much. Ciao, ciao, and aloha.